So let's talk about what happened back in April of 2026. There was this 2-week ceasefire between the US and Iran that was supposed to be the big off-ramp, the way out of a really tense conflict. But instead of leading to peace, it somehow ended with a full naval blockade. Today, we're going to break down exactly how a deal designed to de-escalate things went so wrong so incredibly fast.
And this was the headline that told the whole story. After a marathon 21-hour session, nothing. The entire diplomatic effort just collapsed, and spectacularly. Any hope for a lasting deal? Poof, gone. And what was left in its place was an even more dangerous crisis.
Which really brings us to the key question, right? How on earth did a temporary truce, this little glimmer of hope, actually manage to pave the way for an even more volatile situation? The answer, it turns out, is baked right into the deal itself, and its flaws were there from day one.
Okay, so to understand what went wrong, we first have to look at the agreement that was announced on April 8th. It was brokered by Pakistan, and it was supposed to be this critical 2-week pause. The idea was to stop the fighting long enough for some serious, high-stakes negotiations to begin. And honestly, on paper, it looks pretty promising.
So what was actually in this deal? Well, it had 4 main parts. First, an immediate stop to all fighting. Simple enough. Second, Iran had to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is this absolutely vital channel for global oil. Third, proper negotiations would finally kick off in Islamabad. And fourth, the US was dangling some pretty big incentives, things like sanctions relief and unfreezing Iranian assets. It looked like a classic de-escalation playbook.
But here's the thing. The entire agreement was built on a fatal flaw, a huge, fundamental disagreement about what the deal even covered. And that disagreement emerged almost immediately, and it all centered on one specific place, Lebanon.
And here is the problem in black and white. You had 2 completely opposite interpretations of the deal. The mediator, Pakistan and Iran, they were operating under the assumption that the ceasefire covered all fronts of the war, and that explicitly included Lebanon. But the US and Israel, they flatly rejected that. They argued the fighting in Lebanon was a totally separate issue. I mean, they weren't just on different pages, they were reading from 2 completely different books.
And the result of that disagreement wasn't just diplomatic squabbling, it was immediate and it was violent. Just a few hours after the ceasefire was supposed to be in effect, Israel launched this massive wave of attacks on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. For anyone actually on the ground, the truce was basically dead before it even started.
Well, Iran's reaction was just as quick. From their perspective, the attacks on their ally, Hezbollah, were a blatant violation of the deal. So what did they do? They immediately shut down traffic in the Strait of Hormuz again and threatened to walk away from the whole thing. So within just a matter of hours, the 2 main pillars of the agreement, no fighting and an open strait, had completely crumbled.
This whole thing fell apart so fast that it led a lot of analysts to ask a pretty tough question. Was this deal just built to fail from the very beginning? And when you really start to dig into the structure of the agreement, you can see exactly why so many experts were so skeptical.
You see, analysts have a term for this kind of thing. They call it a low enforcement pause. So what does that mean? Well, think of it like this. It's a truce built more on a handshake than on a legally binding contract. There were no independent inspectors, no clear punishments for breaking the rules, no UN or other body to oversee it. The only thing enforcing the deal was the unspoken threat that the other side would just start shooting again if you messed up.
And this chart just lays the problem out so clearly. Just look at the comparison. For enforcement, this deal gets a measly 1 out of 10. Compare that to a 9 for the 2015 nuclear deal, which had real international inspectors on the ground. For incentive alignment, it looks like only the mediator, Pakistan, was fully bought in. And on what they call temporal rigidity, basically how flexible the deadline is, it gets a 0. It had a hard expiration date with no way to renew it, which is pretty much the riskiest way you can structure a ceasefire.
So what was the bottom line here? Well, based on all these structural problems, one forecasting model ran the numbers and came up with just a 17.5% chance of success. It was a massive gamble from day one, and, the odds were just never in favor of peace. Which brings us to the talks in Islamabad. Now, even with all this chaos, the diplomats still showed up, but that huge disagreement over Lebanon had already poisoned the well. Both sides came to the table with demands that were just complete non-starters for the other side.
Iran drew its red lines before the talks could even officially get underway. The Speaker of Iran's parliament came out and said, look, 2 things have to happen first, a total ceasefire in Lebanon and the release of our frozen assets.
For Iran, these weren't negotiating points, they were preconditions. Do this, then we talk.
And the American response was just as blunt. As you can see right here, a U.S. official just confirmed no agreements have been made on any of those preconditions. The gap between them was just unbridgeable. I mean, think about it. They couldn't even agree on the basic terms to start the conversation. And so, after 21 hours of going around in circles, the whole thing officially collapsed. The U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance came out and gave this very brief statement to the press that said it all. We have not reached an agreement. Just like that, the diplomatic off-ramp was closed for business.
So what happens when a truce this fragile doesn't just fail, but completely shatters? Well, what came after the Islamabad collapse wasn't a return to how things were before. No, it was a fast and really dangerous escalation.
With the door to diplomacy slammed shut, President Trump announced a dramatic new move, a full naval blockade of Iran. So instead of de-escalating, the failure of the talks directly triggered a major military action, shutting down Iran's access to the sea and creating an even more explosive flashpoint in the region.
And all of this leaves us with a really unsettling question. A ceasefire is supposed to be an exit ramp off the highway to war, right? But in this case, by forcing all these disagreements out into the open, with absolutely no way to solve them, did this failed truce actually become an accelerator? Did it end up pushing everyone involved even closer to a much wider and far more devastating conflict? And that's the question the whole world is trying to answer right now.